Hey, what is up, everybody? My name is Matt Druin. I've put together a coalition of housing providers in the local Rochester area that I know, like, and respect, and actually look up to as mentors of mine, to weigh in on the issue of good cause eviction and the prospects and implications for our community. Why are we doing this? One is that there was the opportunity for listening sessions for housing providers, tenants, any stakeholders to appear in a public forum at various rec centers throughout the city throughout the month of August and have 2 minutes to speak about whether they like or dislike good cause eviction and why. 2 minutes isn't nearly enough to cover the complexity and issues of housing. The reason why these people are here is because, listen, we have the ability to put our capital wherever we want to. Okay. We are the, so to speak, owners of the means of production. And the thing is that we are members of this community and we care about what happens in our community. And the thing is that this is not about our pocketbooks. All of us could sell our properties tomorrow, move it someplace else like Ohio or something like that. Uh, and be done with it, right? But the reason why we're still here and the reason why we continue to have presence in the community and the reason why we're doing this is because every single person here that's a housing provider actually cares about what happens in our community, and housing is a huge issue with our community. And there's a huge problem with it. We all agree on that. And so that's the reason for the why. So in this, we're going to go around in introductions in terms of our diverse lineup of panelists on this, so to speak, and then really dive into kind of like what has happened in housing as it pertains to housing providers from 2019 up until now. And then also what the concerns are over good cause eviction, the reasons why we do not support it. And then some possibly closing out with some recommendations on how we can increase the supply of naturally occurring affordable housing throughout the city, which we desperately need. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to go around some introductions. Joe Hanna, who's the first on the Zoom here. I'd like to start with, well, your name, Joe Hanna, your company, how long you've been doing this, and how many residents you are responsible for.
Okay. I'm the only principal in Hanna Properties. I've been providing housing in the Park Noda area for 54 years. I currently own 380 apartments. 80+% of them are in larger buildings, anywhere from 25 units up to 78 units.
Perfect. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Rice. My husband, Francis, and I own Southwedge Properties. We've been in the business now.
Okay, so Rebecca, you cut out for me. I mean, a little bit, and now you're frozen. So, Rebecca, you might want to go out, and then come back into the meeting if you're able to. Jacob Thorpe. We'll go back to Rebecca.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jacob Thorpe. My wife and I own 65 apartments in and around the city of Rochester. We manage about 175 doors, and we've been full-time since 2020, just before COVID.
Excellent. Pat Gallagher, you and Beth are here.
Hi, Pat Gallagher, my wife Beth, she's in the background. We own Gallagher Property Management. We've been managing properties in the city, primarily low income, challenge areas in the cities where we started over 20 years ago, and we're still very have a heavy presence in the lower income areas of the city. And we currently manage over 600 units right now. We currently own us together in partnerships as well, close to 100 units. And again, happy to be here.
Excellent. Sounds good. We'll have Rebecca come in for an intro. I'm going to see if she actually texted me if she's having issues coming in. Okay, I kind of want to go and before sorry, so we'll jump into the next section here. So, next thing I want to jump into is that the landscaping has really changed in housing since, especially namely 2019. It's great that we have a diverse presence here in terms of tenant base that we serve, that sort of thing. Oh, by the way, my name is Matt Drew, and I've been a housing provider of 18 years. We have about 76 units of multifamily residential, and the balance of our portfolio is in commercial, office, industrial, retail, that sort of thing. So the landscape has changed since 2019. Pat, you've been in this business for quite some time. Like, tell us about how your job has changed since, since 2019.
Yeah, 2019 changed the landscaping with everything. Your policies and procedures had to change. The amount of paperwork, the amount of due diligence that you have to do when it comes to if you have an unruly or a tenant situation that went south, the hoops that you have to jump through and the expense. I mean, the expenses right now can be $1,200-$1,300 to remove somebody. And again, we don't want to remove anybody, right? I mean, we're providing homes. We want to get more homes. But since 2019, those laws have really handcuffed property owners. And they, like I said, the expense is one thing, and then the other thing is the time frame. What's really hurting us is when we finally do have someone move out or unfortunately get evicted. It can take 3 to 5 to 6, 7 months before that property turns around again. Due to damages or other situations going on. And since 2019, I've noticed, I've been watching this a long time, and you're seeing more and more owners selling. And so my local owners are starting to sell, and coming in their place is not more local owners. It's more out of state owners, more out of country owners that are new or not familiar with Rochester. They're just looking at the numbers. And sadly, when some of these owners come in and then 6 or 9 months down the road, they're like, well, what's going on? What's going on? Why is the person not paying for 4 months or 5 months? And I have to explain that there's adjournment after adjournment and hearing after hearing. And these owners tell me all the time that they invest in other states, and it's not like that at all, not even close. And I said, well, unfortunately, this is the way it is. And so those are a few hardships that we're having.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I've noticed the same thing. And Rebecca, we're going to pick on you next to start all the way over and then answer this question. So, but one thing that's happened to us is that our expense on mail, for instance, mail alone is like gotten incredibly expensive, and also the length of it to evict. Also, our vacancy, we're holding vacancies for longer because we've the penalty for taking a chance on somebody has gotten so steep that we'd rather hold a unit vacant than to take a chance on somebody, right? So our vacancy rate of it has actually gone up. I think is like, well, you got another vacant unit, Matt. What's the problem? You can absorb it. The problem is that if I have to underwrite a higher vacancy factor in the properties I'm looking at, which I'm currently doing, then I have to either have higher rents to compensate for that, or I have to buy the property for cheaper. All right. And that's exactly what I've been seeing through that. So that's definitely interesting, Pat, that you chimed on, is that you're seeing this thing change from local to out of state, sort of unsophisticated and disconnected buyers. They're going into this. Rebecca, who are you? How long you've been doing this, and how many residents are you responsible for right now?
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I am Rebecca Rice and own Southwedge Properties with my husband, Francis Rice. We've been doing this for about 30 years in Rochester. And we have about 700 units, of which there are, I think, about 250 units of multifamily in the city. And that's about it. I mean, we've been affected by a lot of what's going on. I know you have a question, so.
Oh yeah. So Rebecca, the question is that, how has the landscape as a housing provider changed since 2019, fast forwarding to today?
Yeah, very significantly for us and, all of us other housing providers in New York State. It's caused us, because of basically having our hands tied from doing business the way we have for so many years successfully with very happy tenants, tying our hands to be able to screen tenants the way we need to protect our other tenants in the building, as well as the eviction laws, to be able to evict somebody now, which used to be 30 to 45 day process before the 2019 laws, are now almost 6-7 months at times, which is a big hardship for us, because the process is so long, it's so costly, and it's extremely frustrating, causing us to consider selling properties and buying in other states that are more housing provider friendly.
And you have sold properties,
Oh
if I'm not
yes, we
mistaken.
sold 6 last year, Matt, and purchased properties in Florida, which is way more supportive of housing providers, and actually have 2 that are going to be sold this year so far.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Joe, since 2019, like, you've been at this a while here. Like, what has changed in terms of the landscape and the business of providing housing?
Well, in my particular case, because I have a large staff, the burden of paperwork that some of you referred to is not as great.
Mm-hmm.
But for someone who's doing this on a smaller scale, the logistics what you have to jump through to evict somebody for any reason is really problematic. What I find, I have buildings. I have one in particular, had in all 76 units.
Hmm.
If you have, which I'm presently having, an individual who's causing problems of such a nature that it's disturbing the quiet enjoyment of the nearby residents of their apartment. So what the current laws and good cause would do, it really helps for want of a better word, the perpetrator of violations of a lease, because the neighbors are suffering in this case through his erratic behavior, through his noise and whatever. And I spoke to my attorney, and even without good cause, it would take, which is the situation now, anywhere up to 4 months to evict this person. And I won't bore you all with the process. You're all familiar with it. So my cost with this one problem could be 700 in attorney's fees, 4 months of lost rent, so we're up to almost $4,000. So what has happened here, the onerous landlord, quote unquote, protection laws since 2019 have helped the bad guys and made life more difficult for not only the landlord, but let's focus on the innocent residents who have to live next to somebody who's violating the clauses of their lease.
Absolutely. Jake, what's changed?
So what's changed? I got into landlording just as the laws changed. So I'd have no pre-HSTPA experience personally. I know you're all laughing at me. I'm like the youngest one here, but I spoke to plenty of other landlords. The thing that strikes me as what's changed for everyone else has been screening has gotten a lot more difficult. We have placed plenty of tenants that we wish we had, and we have learned in a post HSTPA world how high our standards have to be to place tenants, because we place someone and then we go through a 6-month eviction process. So our scrutiny of residential history and employment history and credit scores It's a lot higher than we thought it was going to be when we came in, based on reading books and taking advice from people who do not invest in New York State. So I don't have any change for you because I am new to this space, but I can tell you what I've heard.
Okay. So is it more difficult than you thought it was going to be coming into this business?
I think so, yes. A lot of the mentors I looked up to were national, and when I was reading, and I have since gone to national conferences and met landlords from other states, and they don't believe what we have to deal with.
Mhm.
And it's definitely a lot different, and a lot of the advice has to be catered to New York specifically, in terms of duration of evictions and what you can and cannot screen for, and security deposit requirements and things we have to deal with. So yeah, I'd say it's a lot harder than I was made out to be.
Absolutely. Okay. So I just want to kind of get like a cross section of what's happened in housing and how much more difficult it's got, because we not only dealt with the HHTPA 2019, which essentially allows non-paying residents to essentially like finance their residency with just paying the rent if you have to bring them to eviction, for instance. And so because when traditionally in the past, I'm just talking through my experience. Traditionally, in the past, when you got a court date for non-payment, you would negotiate a stipulation of settlement with your attorney and the resident there. It was mutually agreeable where you could either do a pay and stay or pay and go. All right. So a pay and stay when it was negotiated, where the tenant would have to pay for the attorney's fee, the late fee, any other ancillary fees there were in that, lest they get a warrant of eviction, and and then they have to be forcibly removed. All right. Which this is a segue into, I'm going to put Pat in the hot seat for a second here, um, which is when I first, Pat Gallagher and Beth manage some of my inner city properties that are not in the Park Avenue, South Wedge, and Neighborhood of the Arts areas, and also North Winton Village. And the reason why I hired them is because they are extremely proficient in the service of delivering naturally occurring affordable housing to lower income individuals. It was a hat I just wasn't wearing, and I was always used to, in my 18 years of doing this, is you always sign a year lease with tenants. When I originally interviewed Pat and Beth at Gallagher Property Management, I was like, "So, do you guys do 1 year leases?" And that's really, nope, we do month to month tenancies. All right. So Pat, tell us about why that is.
Well, that changed because um, we used to do year leases all the time. And as 2019 came around, and as a couple years after the words, we figured out that again, if you play it right and go play by the rules and use the laws, you're spending a lot of money, you're wasting a lot of time, and you're incurring a lot of damages at your units. So if you go to a month lease, you can just give a notice and effectively stating that your lease ended. It's a 30-day notice, depending how long the person's been there, and then the person would just vacate based on you want to end the agreement, you want to end the lease agreement. So the month to month, if we need to, theoretically, it could be cheaper and quicker to remove someone that had to be removed, and then turn it over again for someone who needs a place.
So that is what's under threat with good cause eviction in our community, is it not, Pat?
I mean, that's 100% under threat. And, from my personal experience, ever since 2019, I would have had hundreds of units personally here. But ever since 2019, I put a pause to it myself. Since then, I've invested in some other states that are, again, completely different than New York. Now with good calls coming in, I'm seeing it, and I'm sure Matt and Jacob, everyone else here is seeing it. A lot of these homes are being sold by housing providers that just had enough, but they're being sold to owner occupants. Okay, so these homes are being sold not to another investor. They're being sold to owner occupants, which means we have less and less inventory. If a good cause comes through, more people are going to sell and say, forget it. And homeowners are buying in the city, anywhere in the city. So that I wanted to stress. And also, when we've had troubled tenants and we have to evict them, it's common to get one or two neighbors, actual people who live there, and say, thank God they left. Thank God you got rid of them. Either they were doing loud music nonstop, parties, or just filthy dirty. Well, if the person's paying rent, especially with good cause, if good cause goes through, and the tenant is paying rent, but I can't get the housekeeping to get better. I can't get them to be good neighbors. I won't be able to evict them. And we're getting calls from neighbors saying, what are you going to do about it, Gallagher Property Management? What are you going to do? I can't do anything about it. So if this goes through, that's just going to get worse. 100%.
Yeah.
May I piggyback on what Pat just said on the month to month? I take a different approach. All my tenants are on lease, with the exception of borderline tenants. We all know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that housekeeping is marginal, who call the office every other day. So what I've found very effective, if I have a tenant who really borderline eviction, by putting them on month to month, I find that just the threat of knowing I can terminate their housing with 1 month's notice has vast majority of the time altered their behavior and made life easier for everyone.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That will be gone now. I won't have that option.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Is that, and there's this whole narrative out there that the reason, like, we're in the business of evicting tenants for no reason. Okay. I don't want to fire customers. Why would I want to fire a customer? Okay. They pay for everything, right? They pay my employee's salary. They pay for repairs and maintenance of the buildings. All of these essential things that are used to operate a business. So why do I want to lose one of those unless it's like actually the last straw? And then there's this current narrative. I was just interviewed by somebody at WXXI, and they looked at the court filing statistics just recently, and they noted that, my God, holdover proceedings are through the roof, considered with what has been historical data. Now, is this thing happening where landlords are purchasing properties or landlords are just jacking up the rents and they're pushing tenants out? And I think that what is happening is, because of the ways that the HSTPA 2018 changed the landscape, as it pertains to operating housing, that lost my train of thought here. That because those things have changed, that it's easier to get out a tenant due to holdover, even if they're behind on rent, than it is to go for non-payment. Because one of the things that Pat taught me is like, don't even worry about getting a judgment. They're not going to be able to pay it. It's like getting blood from a stone. So it's better to, instead of giving them an out through being able to pay just the rent and only the rent, not the attorney's fees, the late fees, and all the other fees that are tacked on top of it, is to use the holdover proceeding to get possession of that place back. And that's the reason why we've been seeing a big spike up in holdover proceedings as well. There's also the other narrative that the reason why landlords in the inner city and the lower income parts have month-to-month leases is because they want to be able to jack the rents up at any point in time, or to be able to sell a property so a new owner can come in and jack up the rents. And that's just simply not true. The reason being is because these are higher risk properties, higher risk of default, and holdover proceeding is really our only tool in order to get that tenant out, even if it is for non-payment of rent, which was completely counterintuitive to me in the process. Now, if good cause eviction passes, there's this other narrative too that's been spun by the supporters of good cause eviction that, oh, if the tenant violates the lease, you can just get them out. You got a reason, you can just get them out, right? Like it's just like some sort of bodily function. Can any of you here talk about a specific incident where you had to evict a tenant for anything other than non-payment of rent? Because that's kind of like what this is akin to, what if good cause eviction passes.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that.
Yes.
Okay, I just am near the end of a situation. I had a tenant whose housekeeping was absolutely abysmal. My staff worked with him, tried to get him to clean up his act. He did not. I went through the usual process. I sent him a first phase letter, which advised him he's in violation of his lease and listed specifically what he did. what he needed to do. 3 weeks later, we re-inspected the apartment, no change. So now I gave him another letter certified telling him that he's in violation of clause X of his lease, and if the conditions aren't rectified in the 2 weeks, I was going to start an eviction. So now we're 5 weeks into the process. So I send the paperwork to the attorney. The attorney has to get a court date, which in this case was about 6 weeks. So now we're up to 11 weeks. He gets to court, he has legal aid, and legal aid argues that he has some more time to address the issue. So 3 weeks later, we go back, nothing has changed. Finally, I get the warrant, but the warrant was stayed to the marshal to get to it, and when the marshal served him, he had a couple of weeks. We're now at the point where we were able to lock him out. Now I have all his belongings in there. So this whole process of somebody who was a matter of housekeeping, by the time it's done, it's going to be 5 months process of legal fees and lost rent. And it's the same with noise or anything else. And with noise, I think all of you are aware, if you have a tenant who's too loud and boisterous and want to take them to court, you have to have other tenants appear in court as witnesses. Affidavits or your business records no longer count. How many tenants do you think you have who are going to be willing to take time off to work to appear in court to argue or to testify against their neighbor?
I can
That's a
add
great
to
story.
that. Yeah, I can add to that. In addition to what Joe said, it's not that just the tenants can't take the time off. They're afraid of retaliation, because
Yes.
a lot of the times these tenants that are so disruptive that we try and get rid of by not renewing their lease, because it's our only option, because they will not testify because they're afraid of retaliation. They won't call the police because they're afraid of retaliation. So we are not able to successfully evict them without police records, without the tenants coming to testify. So that leads us to do not renew, and good cause eviction will take that away from us.
Well, Pat's
Absolutely.
point is well taken when he said, I don't know if the analogy is something I use too often, but the bad tenant is like a body eliminating a bodily function. You can just get rid of them. It doesn't happen.
Mhm. So, Pat, any war stories you can tell about having to evict for anything other than non-payment?
You have a couple days. I got thousands of pictures. Sadly, the thing is, if say we have 650 units, I would say 500 of those are the low-income people in need, people who have few opportunities, lesser resources per se, people in need, folks that are challenged. And let me tell you, we've worn 10 different hats. We're therapy people, we are social workers, we teach tenants how to clean, we've given free supplies. I mean, we've done it all. We've taken care of their animals, but we're heavy in these areas and have been for a number of years. And when we do rent to new applicants who become tenants, how many people pay on the 5th of the month? It says in the lease, you're supposed to pay on the 1st. If not, you're supposed to pay on the 5th. 60% of our tenants would pay by the 5th. Do you think we charge late fees for the 40%? No. That's another admin feature, another thing. So even though everyone's qualified, 60% pay by the 5th, and then its percentages go up as the weeks go on. So we deal with that, which the owner's like, what's going on? We have a lease. We know it's Rochester. Nothing I can do about it. I can't evict. I can't really get late fees. This is how Rochester runs this New York State. So we deal with that part of it. The other thing is, I would say 95% of my low income folks do not get back their security deposit. I mean, that's horrible, horrible. I would love to get back 100% to everybody. That means we can turn over the unit quicker and get it rented. And those numbers have increased since 2019. It's the attitude of I don't care, I don't care. The tenants have the net office to call. They can do habitability hearings in court to delay things. Now the new thing is retaliation hearings. I have a couple hearings scheduled that I have to go to now for retaliation, which has nothing to do with why they're being evicted. Again, another delay, and every time your attorney shows up, it's another bill for the owner, another bill, another bill, another bill, which means, hey, I'm going to sell the property. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Okay, this isn't what you thought it would be. So that's the climate we're in this arena. And I just think, again, if you put more and more regulation on something like this, who's going to stick it out? The city can't buy thousands of homes and turn them into rental property. The state can't do it. I thought we were partnering with the state and the city and working together on this. But if you handcuff us even more, you're going to see more and more people leave. You're going to have less experienced people come in. And for the temporary high of, hey, we got this passed, what's going to happen?
Oops.
Oh, Pat must have so that was some pure cold, Pat. Well, I guess I can piggyback. I do want to get on your take, Jake, to see if you've had any instances where you had to evict it for anything other than non-payment or holdover proceeding. But kind of going into Pat mentioned on the court thing, right? I've been doing this for 18 years, and I've never seen something a system gamed the way that I see it now being played. You have essentially this is what happens is you have once you finally get a court date, which is much longer than it was in the past. Once you finally get a court date, you have a legal aid show up, the tenant, right? They go, hey, Your Honor, we cannot discuss a stipulation of settlement because I need to talk to my client. All right, so there's an adjournment. You just paid your attorney $500 to show up there. All right. So then there's an adjournment. It gets rescheduled. That could be anywhere from, in my experience, 30 to 45 days. Then magically, somehow, your attorney shows up to court. Legal aid shows up without the tenant, and then they say, Your Honor, my tenant is sick this morning, was not able to get to the court date. I'm going to need to reschedule. So in the meantime, they're pulling all of these tricks out of it to make it as protracted as a process as possible. And the thing is that when you appear in front of court, whether it's for non-payment or anything else, if you do not have a stipulation of settlement that's negotiated between legal aid, the tenant, and your attorney, the judge is not going to have a hearing for your case at that point in time. It's basically, if anything comes out of your attorney's mouth besides, hey, Your Honor, we have a stipulation of settlement, we want you to get on the record, then they're going to schedule a hearing. And this is how it takes months and months and months and months, and sometimes actually in our situation, over a year, even without the eviction moratorium to get this. Pat, I do want you to complete your thought, but before I do so, I want to talk about my experience with a drug dealer that was a tenant of ours. All right. So we had a tenant that we rented to. It was in a rapid rehousing program with a Center for Youth, and they were going to guarantee their rent for a year. Great. We had an apartment. We're going to get this young individual off the street. Well, they quickly started dealing drugs out of the apartment, terrorizing all of the tenants that were in our building. We had to actually let a lot of our tenants break their leases to move out because they were so scared of the amount of activity, the comings and goings, the car break-ins around the property. I mean, every single nightmare you could possibly imagine. We'd call the police. Police would show up and like, what do you want us to do? We don't see somebody exchanging money and drugs in front of us. This is all hearsay. I was like, can we at least have a police report that we can use as evidence? Like just some shred of evidence we can use in front of a judge to get this tenant out before the lease is up so they can stop terrorizing our community, right? And I said, there's nothing to report. Like I can't just get a report from you that just says hearsay stuff. What type of business records am I supposed to produce that I don't know? I got 3 phone calls from this tenant that says X, Y, and Z. I've gone to court cases before with that. And the tenant looked me straight in the eye and said, that tenant that's complaining against me has retaliated against me for X, Y, and Z. Right now, a judge, a third party, has to weigh in on that, right? And beyond the benefit of a doubt, they're usually going to side with hearing after hearing after hearing. So this is exactly what happened with this drug dealer, right? Couldn't get a police report, couldn't get any written statements from tenants in terms of a signed affidavit or an appearance in court. Like, we could literally do nothing besides we had to wait till the tenant's lease was up, and we had to. And mind you, when you file for holdover proceeding, you cannot collect rent from that tenant. All right. If you collect $1 from that tenant, that signifies that you're continuing the residency. So during this 3-month period when the lease is up and you're going over through holdover, that's 3 months of rent that you can't collect, and you're probably never going to get back. So that's another cost that has to be factored in delivering housing, right? And us responsible ones are going to look at that and be like, well, we have to either buy the property for less, which not sure if that's happening in this market environment, or charge more in rent. Okay, so that's the reason why. I mean, I interview a lot of housing providers, and they're like, yeah, we're just getting rents as high as humanly possible because this business has become extremely expensive to operate. And who's paying for it? The tenant. And also, we're paying for it as a community because we have people that are unhoused as a result of it. So, Kat, you want to finish your thought in terms of like a case, or how easy or how hard it is to get somebody out, and evidence that you have to do, and that sort of thing?
You know, Matt, you kind of hit it perfectly on that. I mean, I do have, a lot of stories, and really what it boils down to is a long delay. We're left with damages, and the owners 1%, 2% chance are able to collect on some sort of judgment. And after a while, it just gets very taxing, very wearing. And again, I'm seeing more and more people. I'm seeing more movement. This is happening. So, and I believe, like I said, if any part of this good cause passes, more people on the national level, which you hear now, everybody says, stay away from New York, stay out of New York. I think that's going to continue, and you'll probably see prices come down at some point for these challenged areas, because who's going to want them? Who's going to want them? Because the word's going to be out there, hey, it's going to be so difficult. And also management companies. I've been around a long time, and there's a lot of others in our business that want to kind of throw in the towel. They're not really interested anymore. So the landscape has changed quite a bit. And, like I said, I can tell story after story, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna change anything.
Yeah, I'll have to
Matt,
put together a TV series.
Matt,
Yeah.
quickly, what about the other part of this, the rent caps? We haven't talked about that at all.
Oh God, yeah, we haven't even talked about the de facto rent control that Good Cause Eviction puts in place as well. I guess I'll share my thoughts on that, right? Is that I would have more liked to seen a statewide Good Cause Eviction that had a rent cap, rather than our community in our city of Rochester being the sole outlier in our community that is the only one that has good cause eviction, and therefore the de facto rent control, right? Because what does this do in terms of the flow of capital? We saw what a massive flow of capital looked like during the white flight, right? Yeah, mid 1950s, and what it did to our community. So we have basically all the suburbs are not going to opt into good cause eviction because most of the people that live there are homeowners. So what's going to happen is you're going to see a shift in the flow of capital for naturally occurring affordable housing out of the city and into the suburbs, right? And that's really where I have the most amount of concern with this, in terms of the way that it can create an even further widening disparity of the tale of two cities, which we have in our community. So that's my biggest problem with the actual de facto rent control in there. And then also, there are buildings that are so far gone. Now, there's not many of them, but they do exist. They're so far gone that need so much amount of capital improvement and capital preservation projects that the only way somebody can actually make a sustainable venture out of that is being able to raise the rents up to market. All right. And that may be greater than what that 7 or 10% threshold is. And who knows what it's going to turn out once this bill gets out of committee. Okay. Rent control, time and time again, has never done anything in terms of the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. All right. We need to partner with the private investment community, public-private partnership, in order to deliver the outcomes that we want to see synthesized in our community for having a abundance of housing options for people of all income levels, and also being able to live in dignity. That 10-unit building that's been disinvested and rents are way below market, under good cause eviction, that building will not sell. If it does sell, it's going to sell to somebody who's basically an investor that is absolutely fine with the conditions the way they are. All right. The bare minimum. I call them minimalists. And we know there's a few of them that have made the news in our community. These were not investors that had, they went in and raised rents or have high rents and that sort of thing. These are all, super low bargain basement rents that do not create a sustainable business model. So that's the other component of this. Thanks for bringing it up, Joe, because I was like, oh yeah, there's rent control in this too.
Yeah, I was, so everybody was sort of forgetting about that. Well, the city can't have it both ways. You talk about rent control. My taxes went up about 6%, which translated to about a 1.5% increase for each tenant. Wait till you get your insurance bills. You have big properties. Most of you don't have, but on the larger properties, my insurance went up 25%. So, you can't operate on the inflation-driven market that we now have and have a cap on your rents. It just doesn't work.
Absolutely. We have about 7 minutes before I want to give you guys back your time. So we've talked about any other concerns with the good cause eviction that we haven't brought on the table that are problems as pertains to systemic issues that will create in our community. Like I said, guys, before you jump down this thing, like, we have choices as investors. This isn't meant to be like a crying session, that sort of thing. We can sell our properties and reallocate our capital some other market, but we're invested here in the community and want to see our community thrive as well. Anything else in terms of good cause eviction until we get on to my closing segment, which is how can we make this easier? How can we actually create more naturally occurring affordable housing in our community? Any other thoughts on good cause eviction?
I mean, Matt, you talked about the reduction of supply, the increase in screening requirements, and the reduction in quality. I think we talked about all those things, which are in cities and other parts of the country that have had a rent control / good cause. They're usually married, and it has gone away. Supply of housing went through the roof. Building permits went through the roof. Supply went up. I think you hit those. I think those are super big. And there's examples. I could give all kinds of academic writings on the effects of cities like Cambridge that have removed it, and what happened to the market once they removed good cause eviction. It was quite extreme. But as I think you talked about all the things I would hit on.
Okay. Anything else, guys, before we go on with recommendations? So I love to talk about problems. I love to talk about solutions too. So, any solutions? I mean, obviously, we all want to see a higher supply of naturally occurring affordable housing in our city. And I'm using the word naturally occurring affordable housing is because all of you are providers of what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. Is that, you have units that are rent for like, $800 a month or less, a lot of them, right? And you cannot recreate those. You cannot replace those, right, without using subsidized low-income housing tax credit projects, which, as we all know, are incredibly expensive and also are very, very slow to come about. Like Canal Commons, for instance, is a huge project. There's 123 units. It took 8 years for that project to get across the finish line with residents to be moving in. That project was almost $67 million. and created 15 housing units per year over that period, right? So we're not going to be able to build our way out of this. The overall strategy is we need to figure out, yes, there's a place for bona fide low-income housing tax credit projects. There's a place for market rate, high-end luxury housing. And then there's the hole in the middle, which we seem to be, which is disappearing, which is middle apartments for middle income people, low to moderate income people. And that's where we need to partner with our housing providers. So any other thoughts before we get on last 5 minutes of recommendations how to cure this thing?
Well, I would suggest, and I spent 28 years on the board of the Housing Authority. I'm now involved in an organization that deals with the homeless. And the zoning laws coupled with the red tape that is necessary to undertake any project is so difficult. On this homeless project, we just had tax credits, build a building of 16 units at a cost of over $500,000 a unit. And that's because it was an old building and you get into asbestos removal and all the other regulations. You have prevailing rate wages, and it's just whatever dollars are there are eaten up in a good portion by all the procedures necessary to bring the building to fruition.
Absolutely. So yeah, zoning, zoning impediments, that sort of thing. Rebecca, maybe a wave a magic wand. What are some solutions here to help the problem?
Well, certainly not tying our hands more and more, which ultimately hurts the tenants. I think it's listening to housing providers and, the good ones. Most of us are good ones and care about our communities and our tenants. We're all trying to give great housing at reasonable prices to our tenants. So, I don't have any great suggestions other than don't opt in, don't vote for things like this that will just cause all the good ones to leave and all of the out-of-towners who don't care, who aren't vested in this community to come in, because they're just going to make things worse.
Absolutely. Jake, suggestions?
Oh boy. Rochester has 803 homeless people in it from the point in time study in February, and 1,321 vacant properties as according to the city data. I mean, I've thought about this a bunch. I keeps coming back to, like, we have more than enough properties in the city to, if they were filled and renovated, you could house everybody in the city and more, and you could uphouse a lot of folks that really need it. And the reason investors like Joe, Rebecca, myself, Pat, many others don't buy them is because we would lose our shirt trying to make it work with the eviction laws, with the regulation and costs. So a solution that I've keep coming back to is if the city really wanted to see these properties get filled and these tenants get housed and rents stabilize and even potentially kind of taper down, you'd have to activate that supply, which is grant writing for owners to renovate these properties, security to deposit insurance funds, so that when we place a questionable tenant and they do $10,000 of damage, we get a check back instead of losing that money. I think you'd see a lot of these vacant properties get activated if there was a financial incentive tied to the risk we'd have to take to turn them on.
Good thinking.
That's what
Yeah.
I got.
Well said.
Yeah. Pat, what about you?
I feel bad for the city residents and neighbors who've been living here for 20, 30 years and have to deal with these properties and deal with these tenants. I mean, that population lives there, works there, that's home. And another regulation like Good Cause Eviction, again, it's gonna allow, like Joe said, the bad characters per se to remain, which is causing all those issues for those neighbors. So I feel for that. I know the city has changed their ways. They've been coming down quite a bit on negligent landlords, and there's some good and bad on that for sure. But the city has stepped up. The city's more proactive. So the city is coming after landlords to keep their properties in good condition. Plus, we have the strictest, one of the most strictest C of O processes in the nation.
Oh, yes.
It's been that way for years. And Rochester prides itself on that. And there's some good to that for sure. And then the negative is, again, it's very expensive for us to keep up in these properties because whether the tenant damages the property or not, we still have to get the C of O. It still has to be maintained. It's still going to fall on us. Can we retrieve that money back if it's a tenant cause? No. But again, so we have these high C of O policies or the high costs of getting the C of O. And then we hear nothing about tenant accountability. Zero. Tenants have tons of resources and New York State backing, plus this good cause, on the doorstep. What do owners have? The city says, hey, we'll mark it down that it's tenant cause. Or if it's a Section 8 or a different voucher, oh, we'll mark it down. Okay. But ultimately, it's our responsibility. So again, if it's going to be fair and balanced, let's make it fair and balanced. Right now, we're not even close. If good cause comes down, it's going to be completely a mess. And again, you'll have a temporary little party for the side that wants that, but it's going to have a lot of miserable people. And the miserable people are going to be the people who need it the most. And it's just going to make Rochester worse off. I think you're going to have more homeless. You get more issues.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's the reason why we're here is because of the systemic effects, the further systemic damage that was create. And yeah, and Jake hit the nail on the head with this 1,200 vacants that we have in the city, 1,200 vacants, right? And what opportunity exists there that could be completely wasted with passing policy like this because you create a landscape that is untenable for the sustainability for responsible housing providers to go in and reactivate that housing. So all we need to do is we need to be if we do our job, we need to get paid. Okay, that's a non-negotiable, and that's always been that's been in jeopardy for. I mean, I would say before the HSTP at 2019. We have to be able to get a unit back in substantially the same condition that it was left to us, and we need to be able to actually have if we have an aggravation, right, that's for us and for other customers, that we are able to be empowered without being further aggravated in order to actually exercise that power. Because at the end of the day, the only reason why we want to fire somebody, a tenant, is for good reason, and we don't have to prove it to anybody. Because why would we want to fire a customer? All right. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in here. And certainly, I appreciate your valuable time. We got a lot of money in this room right now, so I appreciate that. And we'll talk soon. I'm sure I'm going to hit stop recording.